I think one thing we should probably talk about is the other side, flip this around with Iowa State's offense versus Iowa's defense, because I think this is actually probably the more interesting situation here because it's strength on strength.
By the way, Reese Dagan had a long of 46. Yes, I would agree with you. Like I say, I don't think there's any reason to really question. I mean, I look at the stat sheet. I'm like, why did Abusama only run 5 times? I looked at the stats, and why did Ben Bramer not catch a single ball? So you tell us.
Ben Bramer was banged up last week, so he only played like 18 snaps.
Well, I watched him get targets.
He got one target.
Didn't get him. No, he got 2 targets. He had 2 targets.
Okay, so he got 2 targets.
I'm just saying at least 2 targets. I saw the 2 targets. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, he got 2 targets because he was banged up last week. He just didn't play a lot.
Why would you not run the ball with why would Hansen get more? Didn't Hansen have more rushes than Sama?
Sama got nicked up in the 3rd quarter, and he did not come back in.
Okay.
I mean, he's fine, but he's fine, but they just didn't play him in the 4th quarter. They didn't need to. There's no reason risking Abusama if you don't have to. Okay. in a game that was over and done with. That's why they ran Jalen Jackson a bunch in the 4th quarter too. So
I think so. Sama had the hurdling of the defender in the 1st quarter, which
nice
everybody
play,
you probably had to get a fresh change of shorts, didn't you, Levi?
That happened after the first drive. I didn't bring a 3rd pair of shorts with.
I guess what I would say on that is Abusama is terrific. Breece Hall was terrific. David Montgomery was terrific. And Montgomery had 1 game against Iowa, I believe it was in 2017.
It was the 2017 explosion.
When both teams went nuts offensively in that game.
Yeah.
And they scored
what a fun game that was. I wish we would have won, but
but in general, Iowa's done a pretty good job of containing those Iowa State backs that have been really good against everybody else. And I know Sama improved as the year went on last year, but I have a hard time seeing this group of linebackers / tackles breaking that trend. Do you real quick? Can we just acknowledge something right now? Aaron Graves was really good Saturday. Y.A. Black ate up a lot of double teams on Saturday. They have 2 All-Americans in Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, and a 3rd guy in Kyler Fisher who looked pretty good and is really versatile. Plus Sebastian Castro, who might be the best overall player on the team. I think it's going to be hard for everybody and anybody to run against this front.
Iowa's defense is good and the sky is blue. I don't know what you want me to tell you.
I'm just saying they historically Iowa State doesn't run the ball great against Iowa, in spite of the fact that they usually have really
5 years outside of good running backs that run the ball very well than anybody. But I think you can approach this team a little bit differently. One, I think this is an interesting discussion to have here because I think we're going to see something a little bit different for whatever reason. For the first 8 years of the Matt Campbell tenure, for whatever reason, Matt Campbell decided that the best way to try to beat Iowa is to try to beat Iowa by beating Iowa. And if anybody has ever found that out, trying to beat Iowa at their own game is never a good idea. There's nobody that does Iowa better than Iowa. So if you try to run inside zone right into the middle of the defense, you're not going to have a good time and you're going to lose. So you can't do that. And unfortunately, so in the past, Tom Manning and even a little bit Nate Shieldhaas, they tended to be stubborn with running the ball. They wanted to establish a running game first and then go from there. And if it didn't show up in the 1st quarter, they were going to keep trying in the 2nd quarter. If it didn't show up in the 2nd quarter, they're going to keep trying in the 3rd quarter. And that's just what they were going to do. They got very stubborn with running the ball. I think what we saw last week is a couple really interesting developments. One, jokingly, the Iowa State has always does the first play of the season is always just inside zone in the A gap for 1 yard. That's just what it is. Kind of like Iowa always ran outside zone for 2 yards to start every game for the first 20 years of the Kirk Ferentz era type thing. Same kind of joke or whatever, but then they come out last week and do the thing. They chuck 2 deep bombs and get a touchdown in 38 seconds. And part of that is new offensive coordinator Taylor Mauser. And I think what we saw last Saturday was a couple of really interesting developments. We saw one, that he's very willing to use the passing game to open up the running game. And this is not an offensive coordinator that is going to be stubborn about the running game. Iowa State knows that their stable of receiver, that basically nobody they play is going to have enough corners and safeties to really cover all of Iowa State's weapons in the passing game on every play. So, and they know that they're not going to get stubborn with the running game this time. They're going to use the passing game to open up the running game. I think this is finally the Iowa State offense that understands that when you have the personnel to do it, using the passing game to open up the running game is just as good as using the running game to open up the passing game. Just depends on how you use it. And I think another interesting thing to take away from this is that last Saturday we saw two different ways that Iowa State can be really dangerous in the passing game. Obviously, at the beginning of the game, we saw that they can be very good on explosive plays. They have Jalen Nolan, Jaden Higgins that can be very explosive receivers downfield and that are capable of taking the top off. Or in Jalen's case, honestly, in Jalen's case, coming on crossing routes and then taking it to the house after the catch. But we also saw on the 99 or 97-yard drive, whichever it was, we saw them dink and dunk and really tear through North Dakota's defense all the way up the field with the passing game. They sprinkled in some run here and there, but really they used the passing game to work their way upfield. And something like that, I think, is the exact formula that you want to use to try to beat Iowa. Now, you're going to try to work in some deep ball stuff when you can, because I think Iowa could be vulnerable over the top. Like if they send Jaden Higgins on a deep post and try to make Xavier Wampa cover him downfield, I think that's a matchup Iowa State likes. So you're not going to do that all the time, but you're going to use that to try to stretch them out a little bit more. But Iowa State found two different formulas that the passing game can be successful, and we've seen now too that when it needs to, Iowa State is perfectly happy to go to a pass-heavy offense. They're not going to bat an eye at throwing the ball 40 times in a game or 40 or 45 times if that's what they need to do to win. And I think that's a big change from what we've seen in the past. I don't expect this to be a Cy-Hawk game where Iowa State tries to out Iowa. I think they've finally kind of turned that corner and started to learn that to do Iowa, you have to do what Purdue did, which is to spread them out and cause lots of problems and make Iowa defend the entire field. Purdue kind of had Iowa's number there for a little while, and that's what they did. They took their athletes and they spread them out sideline to sideline, and they made Iowa cover the whole field. And I think, and I know that Iowa State has the athletes at receiver and running back to do that. So I think we saw last weekend with Taylor Mauser a willingness and an enthusiasm for doing exactly that. We saw the explosive plays. We saw them be patient and dink and dunk their way up the field, and they scored on both of those. So we saw last week that the passing game was as good as advertised, and we kind of got a surprise in finding the third receiver already, which is a nice development, because that was kind of the question, is who is going to be the third guy. So the passing game turned out to be as good as advertised. Fortunately, in the second half, they really didn't need to do much offensively. They kind of just started chewing clock a lot in the second half, because I think both teams just kind of wanted to get out of there. And for Iowa State specifically, to avoid more injuries. But then North Dakota seemed like perfectly happy to just take their 20-point loss and leave. So like I said, we didn't get a huge volume of it, but for context on the offenses here, Iowa had this big, points explosion last week, scored 40 points. Obviously, that's the best Iowa's offense has looked in 5 years at least, since CJ Beathard. And Iowa fans are rightfully kind of over the moon about it. Certainly the vibes are with Iowa this week if you're a believer in that kind of thing. The fan bases are certainly more confident in Iowa City than they are in Ames. Iowa averaged 6.9 yards per play last week. Iowa State averaged 7.4. Iowa State fans came away underwhelmed by an offensive performance in which they, on a rate basis, outperformed Iowa who performed in a way that their fans are over the moon about. So that's some context here.
Well, okay, but we can put together the same context, go back to every other opener in the last 10 years, most of which Iowa, the same years in which Iowa has won most of those games against Iowa State. I guarantee you the disparity between points per play in those openers between Iowa and Iowa State.
What I'm telling you though is that I'm not going to say Iowa's offense peaked last week, but they showed a lot. Maybe they did peak last week.
Well, they could have. It's the worst team in the schedule.
Sure.
It's the worst team in the schedule.
There was a lot of stuff that Iowa kind of got away with in the second half that they're just not going to get away with against any Power 5 team. Especially that one, it was like a Cade threw it off like a duck off his back foot, and Iowa just kind of caught it in the end zone out of nowhere.
That made you mad. That made you mad.
That shit's getting picked off 12 times out of 10. It just is. I respect Iowa for getting it together in a way that doesn't make their fans want to puke, but what make me want to puke as an Iowa fan is if I had to lose to Iowa State 80% of the time. That's what would make me. What's actually a funny number though? John Walters brought this up in the post game last week, is that even though Iowa has won 8 of the last 9 total, Iowa State has won 3 out of the last 5 at Kinnick.
Oh, it's actually more than 80%. Thank you. I didn't realize it was more
in
than
a very
80%.
specific time frame. Sure, if you go back to 2000, it's virtually even. or if you go back to the beginning of the Kirk Ferentz era, it's virtually even.
How do you go 1-9 in 10 years and go 3-2?
Well, you got to remember.
at the
You got to
opposing
remember
stadium?
that 2020 they
COVID,
didn't play
sure.
at Kinnick, so they played 2 games in a row at Jack Trice.
Right.
So it's kind of weird. So Kirk Ferentz has not beaten Iowa State at Kinnick this decade. I just wanted to let everybody
One
know
more
that.
thing for Kirk to add to his resume.
I just want to know that Paul Rhodes was the coach the last time Iowa beat Iowa State at Kinnick. So,
and if I'm not mistaken, go back to the Paul Rhodes era. He has a better win percentage against Iowa than Matt Campbell does. Correct?
Against Iowa, yeah, not against
Iowa.
everybody else.
But you want to know? Well, but you want to know part of the reason. I think I'll say this. I know routinely people that are listeners that are Iowa fans are going to come on here and rip you. So I respect you for being on here in spite of knowing that you're going to get ripped, Levi.
I'm not scared.
I respect
scared of you guys.
I respect you. No, not you guys. I'm not ripping you.
No, I'm talking about Iowa fans as a general population.
But here's what I'll say about it. I do think you're right about something. I think you're onto something when you talk about spreading Iowa out. Because I think that's the only way you have a chance. Now, I'm not saying it's going to work because I still think Iowa can play that way, and they've adjusted over the years. I remember back in 2022? I was in West Lafayette for that game. I don't remember what year it was, but it was after Iowa struggled against Purdue. Yeah, because they lost in 21 when they were undefeated. And I think at that point, Phil Parker figured out how to play Purdue. And now Jeff Brom moved on, so we didn't get to see the recent.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not saying that Iowa can't defend spread out teams. That's obviously not what I'm saying. But that's a much better plan to beat Iowa than running it up the gut, 40 times in a game. And I think Iowa State has finally figured that out, because I think for the first 8 years, Matt Campbell tried to out Iowa, which was a dumb plan. It worked one time, but it was
and it narrowly worked.
it narrowly worked one time, but that's how Iowa always wins game, is narrowly worked.
Can I get you to admit something, Levi? I just want you to
sure. I want to tell you Iowa's defense is good again, or what?
No, I want you to admit something. All right. I want you to I want you to look at everybody on this show, and I want you to admit that Iowa State, I don't believe in luck, but the game in 2022 was as fortunate for Iowa State as you could possibly imagine, with some of the things that happened in that game, just everything about that game.
They got bounces. I mean, it seems like every side.
Well, it wasn't just bounces.
It has some lucky bounces.
Like the
2021 game. Like the 2021 game, Iowa got some pretty friendly bounces and stuff like that too.
What do you mean? Dominated that game. What are you talking about?
Or maybe I think in 2019. Oh, 2019, Iowa got a dumb lucky bounce. Got a dumb luck play on that punt return, stuff like that.
Okay.
So
I would give you that. But
the first thing I will admit is that every Cyhawk, the new dumbest thing you've ever seen happens. Like that's the trend. That's the only constant about Cyhawk is that someone on one of the teams will commit the dumbest thing you've ever seen.
That's why we call them the Cyclones. Hey, I'm just saying the dumb thing normally comes from the boys in red, not the boys in gold.
You're 100% correct. And like the last, especially with Matt Campbell era, if they've lost in a dumb way, it's obviously been Iowa State typically. 2022 it was Iowa, but now it's whatever.
Yeah, but I wouldn't even. 2022 is just like mistake after mistake after mistake. I wouldn't say they were dumb.
You know what's funny though is I remember us talking about that season, like talking about this game before that season, and we were both in agreement that Iowa was probably going to win because Iowa State was really young. They were moving in a new quarterback and all this, forever. And at the end of the show, I remember Quipping was like, but it doesn't make any sense. So Iowa State will probably win. And then we were both like, and then then it happened.
Let's not forget that 2021 was. Were we talking about 21 or 22? 22. That was coming.
Iowa State won at Kinnick.
Yeah, that was coming on the heels of Iowa's debacle against South Dakota State week 1. So I was not that confident heading into week 2. I didn't know what to think.
I think we were. It was the preseason one that we kind of agreed that Iowa was going to win. I think that's what it was. Just a funny thing I remember the other day.
Let me just respond to Hair Trigger in our chat earlier that made the comment you put up on the screen, Mark. He said, I have a hard time seeing Iowa State scoring. That, with all due respect, I think that's a naive comment to make, because when you watch the game and go back and watch the game against North Dakota Saturday, Iowa State looked very, very proficient through the air at times. They just didn't have. Levi's right. They just didn't have the ball very much. And I thought it was peculiar that they didn't run more with Sama even when he was in there. Because, I mean, even if he was out in the third quarter, Levi, it still only finished with 3 carries. But they did open the game throwing the ball. And, I mean, Noel and what was it? Green?
Jaden Higgins. And Eli Green. Yeah.
They were all very good. And so we've seen Iowa State even last year and Jack Trice. They figured a way through the air to get back in that game at the tail end and give themselves a chance. They didn't pull it out, but they have. I mean, even go back to the 2022 game when what's his face beat Riley Moss for the
Xavier
one.
Hutchinson. Yep.
Hutchinson beat Riley Moss for the one touchdown of the game. If Iowa State's going to win, they're likely going to do it by taking advantage of Iowa's corners.
And that's kind of the point I was making earlier too, is that like the good things that Iowa State should take away from last weekend is that they established that the passing offense is every bit as good as we thought it was going to be, and that they have the scheme put together that if they can find holes in Iowa's secondary, that's a place where they're talented enough to do damage if they can find some room. And that's really the point I'm trying to make here, is that they can use that, and then hopefully if they can use that with the passing game and get moving downfield, then the running game can open up from there. And then if you can get room for Abu Sama, anything's possible. So, that's.
But I just want to say, I'm not making a prediction that Iowa State's going to win. I'm just simply saying if they're going to win, they do have a passing attack. They proved that Saturday, and absolutely. I already suspected that they had a passing attack.
Yeah. And
we didn't see anything from the tight ends. So that's,
Yeah, Bramer was basically not included in the passing game because he was banged up. So they whatever they did passing wise last Saturday is as impressive as they did look in the passing game. That is not including Brent Bramer.
Let me just say this. If Iowa I see some people in the chat. If Iowa shuts out Iowa State Saturday, if they win like 24-0, Mark, then hold the phones, because
then you can probably pretty clearly name Iowa top 3 defense in college football, and maybe better, maybe not 3 type of thing.
Well, yeah, I'll be very impressed if they do that. I over and over again, that's one thing Paul Rhodes was able to do at times as well. You mentioned spreading teams out. I used to think every year we should expect a trick play or some sort of trickeration from Iowa State. We haven't seen that as much in recent time. Where Matt
Campbell's not a trick play guy.
Well, it was successful at times.
Paul Rhodes is the riverboat gambler, but Matt Campbell is whatever the opposite of a riverboat gambler.
I think
he's the guy that didn't buy the ticket. He's sitting on the shore on the park bench watching the river.
But Levi, I think against Phil Parker, that's the way to go at times.
It's I don't listen. You're not going to hear any protests from me that I was just run a trick play or two once in a while. But and I shouldn't say that they've never run a trick play. I mean, there's been a couple of times where they've converted on double passes and stuff. Actually, they did against Iowa in 2019. Yep. So it's not like they'll never do it. But like I said, Matt Campbell's not the riverboat gambler that Paul Rhodes was. So it's kind of we'll see. I have confidence that they've got a game plan put together to try to really use passing game as the primary way to attack Iowa, and then use the running game where it makes sense.